My name is María del Rosario, and for over a decade, my life was a whisper of prayers within the walls of a modest convent on the outskirts of Ciudad Juárez. I was a nun, a servant of God, and I believed with all my soul that goodness was a seed planted in every human being, waiting only for the light of faith to blossom. My mission was to care for the children of our orphanage, small and fragile souls that the city, in its cruelty, had discarded. I offered them bread, a roof, and the word of God, convinced that love and patience were the only weapons needed to combat the darkness that surrounded us. My routine was a cycle of masses, catechism classes, and lullabies, a haven of peace in a land haunted by the violence of drug trafficking. I was a woman of unwavering faith until the day the devil knocked on my door. This story is about a faith that was pushed to its absolute limit, a journey that transformed me from a servant of God into what the criminals feared most. Before we delve into the darkness that changed me forever, I ask for your help to continue bringing powerful narratives like this to light. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers with this video. If you believe in the power of these stories, please subscribe to the channel and comment below what city you are watching from. Your support is our fuel. It's what allows us to keep giving a voice to accounts that cannot be forgotten. Your help makes all the difference, and I am immensely grateful for every one of you who joins us on this journey, as it is your strength that allows me to share mine. At the heart of my world were all the children, but two of them, Ana and Miguel, were like my own shadow. Ana, at 8 years old, with eyes that seemed to contain all the stars of the desert, drew angels on the dusty courtyard walls. Miguel, her 10-year-old older brother, was her silent guardian, a serious boy who already carried the weight of a lifetime on his shoulders. I saw in them the promise of a future that Juárez insisted on denying. They were the personification of innocence, the living proof that even in the most arid soil, beauty could flourish. My devotion to them was fierce, a protective love that would become the spark of my fury and the reason for my damnation. They were my faith made flesh and bone. Outside our walls, Ciudad Juárez in the 2000s was a purgatory on earth, a city of dust, heat, and fear, where a life was worth less than a bullet. The streets whispered a name in dread: El Verdugo, the leader of the local cartel, a ghostly figure whose cruelty was legendary. Disappearances were common, mass graves were discovered in the desert, and justice was a mirage. The police, corrupt and powerless, served only as another cog in the cartel's death machine. We, at the orphanage, lived in a bubble of prayers, trying to ignore the sound of distant gunshots, pretending our thin walls were an impenetrable fortress against the evil that breathed outside, an evil that sooner or later would come to collect its due. I remember one particularly hot afternoon, the sun punishing the cracked ground of our courtyard. I was with Ana and Miguel, trying to cultivate a small flower bed. It was an almost impossible task in that ungrateful soil, a perfect metaphor for our existence. As we planted the seeds, Ana, with the innocence only a child possesses, asked me if God could hear her prayers from so far away, from a place that seemed forgotten. With a smile that hid my own fear, I assured her he could. I told her that God's heart was always close to the smallest and most helpless. In that moment, my faith was pure, a shield against the harsh reality. Little did I know that shield was about to be shattered into 1,000 pieces. Father Javier, my mentor, and the closest thing to a father I ever had, used to visit us every week. He was a good man, but his eyes carried the weight of decades of seeing the worst of humanity. During one of those visits, he warned me, with his weary voice, that my faith was a beautiful but dangerous flame in a place like this. Maria, he said, faith doesn't stop bullets. I, in my stubborn devotion, retorted that faith was the only thing we had left, our only refuge. He saw the world as it was, I still insisted on seeing it as it should be. That conversation was a premonition, the echo of a conflict that would later become my greatest internal battle, the struggle between the woman I was and the creature I would be forced to become. The community around us lived in a constant duality of respect and terror. They saw me as a holy figure, a protector of the innocent, and often left small offerings at our door, a little bread, some fruit, whatever they could share. However, the same fear that made them admire my courage also paralyzed them. They knew who ruled the streets. They saw the halcones, the cartel's lookouts, on every corner, and knew that a wrong look or a misplaced word could mean a death sentence. It was a conspiracy of silence, a collective surrender to the cartel's tyranny. This widespread helplessness was the fertile ground where my own rebellion, born of desperation, began to take root long before I even knew it. The last night of peace I ever knew was a night like any other. The children, already in their pajamas, gathered in the small chapel for evening prayer. The candlelight danced on their sleepy faces, and the air was filled with the murmur of their innocent voices. I looked at Anna and Miguel side by side, and felt a wave of love so overwhelming it hurt. My life in that instant seemed to have a clear and unquestionable purpose, to be the guardian angel of these children. Protecting them from the darkness was my calling, my promise to God. As I closed my eyes to pray, I could not imagine that in just a few hours that very darkness would invade our sanctuary and steal not only the lives I swore to protect, but my own soul as well. The terror did not arrive with a bang, but with a silence that settled in the next morning, when Anna and Miguel's chairs remained empty at the breakfast table. At first I thought it was a childish game, a prolonged session of hide-and-seek, but as the hours dragged on, my heart began to hammer against my ribs, each beat an echo of the panic rising in my throat. I searched every corner of the orphanage, my calls for them echoing in the empty hallways, growing more desperate each time. The other children, sensing my anguish, watched me with wide, frightened eyes. The peace of our little sanctuary had been violated, and an icy certainty began to take hold of me. They were no longer there. The darkness I had so feared had finally breached our walls. I went out into the dusty streets, a small, faded photograph of the two in my hand, my habit dragging on the ground. I approached neighbors, shopkeepers, anyone who crossed my path, but I was met with a wall of silence and fear. People averted their eyes, mumbled that they hadn't seen anything, and quickened their pace. In their eyes, I saw not just a lack of information, but a deep, paralyzing terror. They knew what the disappearance of two children meant in this city. They knew that speaking up was signing their own death warrant. The entire community was held hostage by the cartel, and their cowardice, born of a survival instinct, was a knife that twisted deeper into my loneliness. In that moment, I realized I was completely alone in my search. The news came at the end of the day, not through official channels, but as a poison whispered from mouth to mouth. Two children's bodies found in the desert, in the area everyone knew as the dumping ground for the unwanted. Father Javier, his face pale and his shoulders slumped, accompanied me to the city morgue. The smell of chemicals and death hung in the air, a prelude to the horror that awaited us. And then I saw them. Under a white, stained sheet, the small bodies of Anna and Miguel lay, marked by the brutality of monsters. In that instant, the world stopped spinning. My cries wouldn't come out. They were stuck in my throat, a knot of pure agony. There, in that cold, impersonal room, my faith wasn't shaken. It was executed. I looked up at the sky through the dirty window and felt nothing, just an absolute void. Driven by one last shred of hope in human justice, I went to the police station. I clutched the cross of my rosary so tightly that the wood dug into my palm. Before me stood Captain Morales, a man whose clean uniform couldn't hide the corruption in his soul. He listened to my story with a poorly disguised boredom, his eyes empty of any empathy. He spoke of procedures, of a lack of witnesses, and had the audacity to suggest that the children were perhaps in the wrong place at the wrong time. His words were an insult, a slap in the face to my grief. He was not a protector of the law, he was a watchdog for the cartel. The institution meant to protect the innocent was an accomplice to their murderers. My faith in the laws of men died there, in that stuffy office. I returned to the orphanage's chapel, now a mausoleum of my former life. The silence was overwhelming. I stood before the large wooden crucifix that adorned the wall, the symbol of everything I believed in, but the suffering face of Christ no longer offered me comfort. It only offered a reflection of my own powerlessness. In a gesture of fury and despair, I ripped the cross from the wall with all my strength. It fell to the floor with a deafening thud, the sound of my soul breaking. In that moment, a new and terrible clarity took hold of me. If the justice of men is corrupt and the justice of God is silent, then my vengeance will be the only prayer this city will hear. From now on, I swear for the innocence that was stolen, I will not rest until every last one of them pays. If you felt the pain that transformed me, understand that my fight has just begun. Subscribe to witness the journey of a woman who refused to remain on her knees. The woman who was Sister María del Rosario died in the city morgue. The one who emerged from the ashes of her grief was another creature, a shadow moved by a singular, unholy purpose. The first thing I did was shed my habit. The black wool, which once represented devotion, now felt like a shroud. I put on simple dark clothes, the garments of a ghost. The only thing I kept was my wooden cross, which now hung on my chest, not as a symbol of faith, but as a tombstone, a constant reminder of the blood debt owed to me. My days were no longer marked by church bells, but were measured by the passing of shadows in the alleys, as I watched, learned, and waited. My first hunt was not driven by rage, but by a cold calculation. I spent weeks mapping the enemy's territory, my own community, now seen through a new lens. I identified the pawns on El Verdugo's board, the halcones, young lookouts posted on rooftops, and the small-time dealers who operated on the street corners. They were the eyes and ears of the monster, the nerve endings of the beast that had devoured my children. My transformation began in silence, in the patience of a predator studying its prey, learning its habits, its weaknesses, the exact moment to strike. The nun in me prayed for forgiveness, but the woman I had become sharpened her resolve. I chose my first target, a lookout known for his cruelty, a young man who boasted about the fear he inspired. I followed him. For days, my heart an anvil in my chest. Every fiber of my being, shaped by a life of compassion, screamed at me to turn back. But then, I would close my eyes and see the faces of Ana and Miguel. Their memory was the fuel that extinguished any hesitation. I cornered him in a dead-end alley, under the flickering light of a street lamp. The astonishment in his eyes when he saw me, a woman emerging from the shadows, quickly turned to arrogance. He didn't see a threat, only prey. It was the last mistake he ever made. Our fight was clumsy, an ugly and desperate confrontation. He was stronger, but I was moved by a fury he couldn't comprehend. There was no technique, only the raw force of pain. I used a piece of iron pipe I found on the ground. The first blow was hesitant, but those that followed were delivered with the full force of my anguish. The sound of metal meeting bone echoed in the alley, a sound that would haunt me forever. As he fell, bleeding onto the filthy ground, I saw the fear in his eyes, the plea of a boy who, beneath his monster's mask, was just a boy. And in that moment, the horror of what I had done crashed down on me. As he drew his last breath, I felt no satisfaction of vengeance, only a cold emptiness. I had taken a life. I had violated the most sacred of God's commandments. I looked at my hands, covered in blood, and the woman I used to be wept in silence. This is the price of justice in this rotten world, a price that was forced upon me and that I now choose to pay. If you understand the abyss I have entered, if you feel the weight of this choice, I ask you to subscribe and continue following this story. Your support is a reminder that, even in the deepest darkness, a voice can echo and be heard. I returned to the orphanage, like a thief in the night, my soul trembling. I went to the small bathroom and scrubbed my hands until the skin was raw, but the stain wouldn't come out. It wasn't a physical stain, but a spiritual one. I looked at my reflection in the broken mirror and didn't recognize myself. My eyes, which once reflected the light of faith, now held an abyss. Sister Maria had been buried, and in her place stood a vigilante, a creature of the night born from pain. That night, I did not pray. I just sat in the dark, listening to the silence and the echo of what I had done. The first step on a path of no return. The news of the lookout's death spread like wildfire. The body, found in the alley with a small wooden cross, left on his chest, sent a clear message. Fear, the currency with which the cartel bought silence, began to turn against them. Whispers started about an avenging angel, a ghostly figure who hunted the guilty. No one suspected a nun, and that invisibility became my greatest asset. The fear I now inspired was a weapon more powerful than any blade, a terror that seeped into their ranks and made them look over their shoulders in the dark. My next actions were bolder. The first kill had broken, something inside me, removing the last trace of hesitation. I intercepted a small drug delivery, not for the merchandise, but for the notebooks I found. They contained names, places, schedules. I began to see the organization's structure, its nodes and connections, but I knew an iron pipe wouldn't be enough. I needed more. Through a reluctant contact in the community, an old man who owed the orphanage a favor, I acquired an old revolver. The cold weight of the steel in my hand felt alien, profane. Holding that gun was my true baptism into the world of violence, a dark sacrament that forever divorced me from my past life. Father Javier sensed the change in me. He didn't know the details, but he saw the darkness gathering in my soul. He confronted me in the orphanage courtyard, the same place where I had planted flowers with the children. "What is happening to you, Maria?" he asked, his voice full of genuine pain. "The light in your eyes is fading." Our conversation turned into a heated argument. He pleaded with me to leave justice to God, not to lose myself on a path of hatred. With a voice choked with anger and pain, I told him that God was silent and that my soul was already lost. The only thing I had left was to make sure I took the monsters with me. I realized that brute force and fear would only get me so far. I needed information, someone who knew the guts of the corrupt system that protected the cartel. Only one name came to mind: Ricardo "Rico" Vargas. He had been the city's best investigative journalist until his attempt to expose the link between the cartel and politics destroyed him. He lost his job, his credibility, and his family. Now, he was a shadow of his former self, a man who spent his days drowning his frustrations in the bottom of a tequila bottle. Finding him was my only hope of reaching the serpent's heart. I found Rico in a dusty, dimly lit cantina, the smell of alcohol and despair hanging in the air. He looked at me with suspicion, his cynical eyes sizing me up. I sat down in front of him and told him my story, not all of it, but enough. I told him about the Justiciera, who was terrorizing the cartel, and offered him a deal: his help, his investigative expertise, in exchange for the biggest story of his life. A chance to expose everything he ever wanted to and reclaim his honor. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. But beneath the cynicism, I saw a spark of interest, the glint of the old reporter still living inside him. At first our alliance was tense, marked by mutual distrust. He was a man who had lost faith in humanity. I was a woman who had lost faith in God. But as we began to work together, a strange symbiosis formed. He was my strategic mind, my guide through the city's labyrinth of corruption. I was his enforcer, the force that turned his information into action. We were two broken souls, united by a common desire to see El Verdugo's empire fall. He sought redemption through truth. I sought vengeance through blood. With Rico's help, my hunt became surgical. He reactivated old contacts, dug through forgotten archives, and pieced the puzzle together. He provided me with names of key figures, money laundering routes, and safe house locations. I was no longer just a ghost in the alleys. I became a saboteur. I disrupted their operations, burned their money, sowed discord and paranoia within their ranks. Each strike was bolder than the last, and the legend of the NUN Avenger, as they began to call me, grew with each passing night, a dark fairy tale whispered by criminals before they slept. The cartel did not stand idle. They began to hunt me with renewed ferocity. On a rainy night, I was lured into an ambush. It was my mistake, a moment of overconfidence. The shootout was quick and brutal. I managed to escape, but not before taking a grazing bullet to my arm. I hid in an abandoned warehouse, pain throbbing in my body, the rain mixing with my blood. In that moment of vulnerability, the weight of everything I had done crashed down on me. I looked at the cross on my chest and wondered what Ana and Miguel would say if they could see me now. Was I honoring their memory, or becoming the kind of monster that took them? This journey is consuming me, turning me into something I myself fear. Every step I take toward vengeance is a step further away from the woman I was. I know many of you may question my methods, but I ask you to try to understand my pain. The system failed me. Faith abandoned me. What else was I left with? If my story resonates with you in any way, if you believe that sometimes the fight against the darkness requires us to become part of it, please consider subscribing. Each new subscriber is a reminder that I am not alone in this darkness. While I wrestled with my internal demons, the outside world was closing in. Captain Morales, pressured by El Verdugo to end the phantom menace that was disrupting his business, intensified his hunt. But he wasn't looking for justice. He was looking to eliminate me. He became an obstacle, as dangerous as the cartel itself, using police resources to protect the criminals and hunt the only person fighting them. The line between law and crime in Ciudad Juárez had been completely erased, and I was trapped in the middle, hunted by both sides. The pressure led Morales to act more desperately. Together with the cartel, he set an elaborate trap using a fake informant who promised to deliver one of El Verdugo's lieutenants. The bait was almost irresistible. My thirst for revenge nearly blinded me, but Rico, with his journalist's instinct, smelled the setup. His last-minute investigation revealed the trap, saving me just in time. This incident solidified our trust and made it clear that we were playing a deadly game where a single mistake would be our last. The entire city seemed to be against us. To move up the chain of command, I needed information that could only be obtained from the inside. I captured one of the cartel's top enforcers, a man known for his brutality. I took him to an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for my life, but deliberately inflicting pain to extract the truth. The act of torturing him was the hardest thing I have ever done. Each of his screams was a nail in my soul's coffin. I got what I wanted, the location of a crucial operation led by El Verdugo's right-hand man. But the cost was terrible. I felt filthy, corrupted to the core. Father Javier found me shortly after. I don't know how. Perhaps he never stopped following me, worrying about me. He didn't need to say a word. The look of deep sadness and disappointment in his eyes said it all. He saw the stain on my soul, the darkness that had finally consumed me completely. There was no sermon, no plea, just a heavy, painful silence between us. He made the sign of the cross and walked away, and I knew that in the eyes of my old mentor, the woman he had known was truly dead and buried. The information I extracted from the enforcer was the turning point. Rico confirmed the details. El Verdugo would personally oversee a massive arms shipment at an abandoned warehouse complex near the railway. It was our chance, our only chance to get to the king. The plan was suicidal. To invade a heavily guarded location, to get through dozens of armed men, to reach a man who was practically a ghost. But there was no other option. This hunt had to have an end. The decision was made. We were going to hunt El Verdugo himself. The days leading up to the attack were filled with almost unbearable tension. I cleaned my old revolver with a calmness that frightened me. Rico used his last resources to get blueprints of the location and details on guard patterns. We didn't talk much. The weight of what was to come hung over us. One afternoon, I went to the small cemetery where Ana and Miguel were buried. I didn't pray. I just stood there, in silence, renewing the promise I had made to their memory. This was no longer about heaven or hell, about good or evil. It was about finishing the man who took their future. On the night of the operation, I sought out Father Javier one last time. I found him in the empty chapel, praying. Our conversation was brief and restrained. There was no more anger between us, only a deep sadness. I confessed that he had been right, that my soul was stained beyond redemption. But I told him it was a path I had to walk to the end. I asked him not to pray for me, but to keep praying for the children who could still be saved. It was my farewell, my acknowledgement of the abyss that separated me from grace. As I left the church, I left behind the last connection to my old life and walked toward the final confrontation. The warehouse district was a cemetery of steel and rust, bathed in the ghostly light of a waning moon. I moved through the shadows, no longer a woman, but a purpose. The heavy air, smelling of oil and decay, was the breath of the hell I had come to visit. Miles away, Rico was my only link to the world, his voice crackling over a small radio guiding my steps. The perimeter guards fell without a sound, victims of a precision born from months of hunting. The clumsy nun who first killed with an iron pipe had been buried long ago. In her place was a predator whose every action was lethal and economical. With every step toward the main warehouse, my heart beat like a war drum, announcing my final judgment. When I breached the side door, chaos erupted like a grenade. The inside of the warehouse was a hornet's nest, dozens of armed men protecting their unholy hive. The sound of gunfire echoed in the cavernous space, a metallic thunder that illuminated scenes of violence in strobe-like flashes. I became a whirlwind of fury. There was no heroism in what I was doing, only an ugly, desperate dance for survival. I moved from cover to cover, my old revolver spitting fire. I felt the pain of blows and shrapnel, but the image of Ana and Miguel burned in my mind, a sacred flame that consumed all fear. Every man who fell was another nail in the coffin of their empire. High above, on a metal platform, he watched. My ascent toward his office was a bloody pilgrimage. The floor was strewn with the bodies of his soldiers. The last few, the most loyal, formed a human wall before the metal staircase. The fight became intimate and brutal. I used my knife, my hands, my pain as a weapon. Every blow was for Ana. Every cry of pain was for Miguel. I was no longer just a woman seeking vengeance. I was a force of nature, a storm of pain that he himself had sown and that had now come to reap him. The last guard fell, and I kicked open the door to his sanctuary, panting, wounded, but unbreakable. The hunt was over. El Verdugo was waiting for me. He wasn't the grotesque monster I had imagined, but a charismatic, well-dressed man, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that chilled my blood. "So, the little nun finally came to confess her sins," he said, his voice as smooth as poisoned silk. The room was his throne, an oasis of luxury in the midst of the chaos I had created. The confrontation would not be just of bullets, but of wills. This is the moment. The abyss stares back at me through this man's eyes. Everything I have done, everything I have become, leads to this room. I need your strength now. Subscribe, not to save me, but to bear witness. that justice sometimes must be dragged from hell with one's own hands. He didn't attack, he talked. His words were knives, dissecting my soul with sadistic precision. He spoke of the children's deaths with terrifying indifference, admitting his order as if discussing the weather. And then he delivered his most venomous blow. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You came to destroy a monster, and in the process you became an even more fervent copy. We are the same, you and I. We both believe that violence is the answer. The only difference is that your God gives you a more elegant excuse than my greed." His words were a mirror, forcing me to face the reflection of the creature I had become. His words hit their mark, but the effect was not what he expected. They didn't break me. On the contrary, they burned away the last traces of doubt and conflict within me. Our battle was primal. He was stronger, a brute trained in the art of violence. I fought with the fury of a damned soul who had nothing left to lose. We crashed through furniture, broke glass, our bodies colliding in a dance of death. He was the embodiment of all the evil that had destroyed my life, and I was the inevitable consequence of his sins, the debt that had finally come to be collected. In his face, I didn't see a man, but a symbol of all the rot I had sworn to exterminate. With one last, desperate effort, I gained the upper hand. He was on the floor, spitting blood, his arrogant smile finally shattered. I aimed the barrel of my revolver at his forehead. He looked up at me and laughed, a gurgling, broken sound. "Do it," he dared me. "Finish the job. Become me." For a second, an eternity, I hesitated. The distant echo of my vows, the image of Sister Maria praying for peace, the memory of a life of mercy. But then I saw them. I saw Anna's smile and Miguel's protective gaze, and I understood. Mercy for this man would be the final betrayal of their memory. My transformation was complete. I was no longer an instrument of God's justice. I was my own justice, and my justice knew no forgiveness. I pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot hung in the air for an instant, and then faded, swallowed by a silence deeper than any prayer. El Verdugo lay at my feet, his empty eyes finally devoid of all their arrogance. I had done it. I had reached the end of my bloody path, but the catharsis I expected never came. There was no relief, no peace, only an immense, cold void. The fire of vengeance that had consumed me for months was extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ashes of my soul. Killing the monster didn't bring my children back. It didn't restore my faith. It only left me alone in the silence, a murderer staring at her reflection in the blood of the man who created her, forever stained by sin. Before the first sirens cut through the night's silence, I vanished. I slipped back into the shadows that had become my only home. Rico, true to his word, arrived. With the authorities, but of me, there was no trace. He published the story, his masterpiece, exposing the entire web of rot that suffocated the city, from the cartel's crimes to the complicity of Captain Morales and other officials. His truth shook the foundations of Juarez's corrupt power, initiating a painful but necessary purge. Justice, lame and late, began to move, but of the NUN avenger, the figure who had lit the fuse, nothing more was ever heard. I became what I had always been, a ghost, a legend whispered in the streets. Father Javier, upon hearing of El Verdugo's fall, went to the abandoned chapel of the orphanage. On the dusty altar, he found the large wooden cross I had ripped from the wall. It was clean, but the dark wood seemed to have absorbed all the darkness I had embraced. He knew it was my farewell, my final act of a distorted faith. He knelt, his weary body trembling, and wept. He wept for the woman I had been, for the creature I had become, and for the soul he no longer knew if could be saved. My legacy was an open wound on the city's conscience, a saint to the oppressed, a demon to the sinners, an eternal question of whether the ends can ever justify the means. My final fate remains a mystery. Some say I fled across the border, seeking anonymity in a foreign country, trying to live out my days in peace. Others swear my war never ended, that the nun avenger continues her crusade in other cities forgotten by God, a guardian angel with blood on her hands. The truth is, vengeance did not bring me redemption. It did not give me the rest my soul craved. Perhaps my true penance is not hell, but this twilight existence, forever walking the line between light and darkness, protecting the innocent from an evil I now know so intimately. My name is María del Rosario, or at least it was. Now, I am just a whisper, a ghost story told to frighten the wolves who disguise themselves as men. My vengeance did not heal me, but it gave a voice to the silent, screams of the innocent. My war in this city may be over, but the fight against darkness is eternal. Thank you for listening to my confession, for walking with me through my personal hell. There are countless stories like mine, buried under the weight of fear. By subscribing to this channel, you help ensure that these voices are not forgotten. Your support is a candle lit in the darkness. Please, do not let it go out.